Hello and welcome to the first studio part of this lecture series of Politics of Code. So our lecture is split into three parts. One is the lecture where I tell you things. The second is when we meet in person and discuss things. And the third is the studio where I introduce some technology that you should try yourself. And the first studio class is about online publishing. I mean, publishing, of course, is a typical action that is really inherently political. To publish, to express yourself, is one of the most important forms of political action. We will look in particular into WordPress as the most widespread publishing platform in the world. So I will lead you through setting up your own WordPress server on your own web space. Before we go there, let's just have a look into how the news media and publishing over the last years have evolved. And the following slides I've taken from Benedict Evans' publications. So Benedict Evans is an analyst, used to be in venture capital with Andreessen Horowitz, one of the most successful venture capital firms in Silicon Valley. Evans returned to London recently and is now freelancing, I guess, as a venture partner also in other venture capital firms after leaving Andreessen Horowitz. And I highly recommend subscribing to his newsletter, which comes out every Tuesday and has the most important technologically oriented events of the week summarized and often in-depth analysis. So you should consider reading Benedict Evans' newsletter. Yeah, and so here Benedict Evans looks into the development in classic media first. I mean, so television, my own history. I used to work in television like 25 years ago, first as an analyst and as a marketing person in advertising sales, and helped this industry transition from broadcast, that means electromagnetic waves sent through the air and received by aerials, by antennae in the household, and then be retranslated into visual signals on a cathode ray tube screen into an IP-based industry, which means that you have digital signals running through cables, usually can also be through the air, of course, but then be decoded in a so-called codec, which is running on your computer and put together as a series of digital images which appear to us as video. We will look into these things a bit closer later on. Today we want more look at what the industry as a whole has seen in changes, and you can immediately see that people have been cutting their cords, as television people would call it. So people cancel their subscriptions to cable TV services. The same is for classic broadcast. The audiences drop sharply. At the same time, we see the rise of online video services. The most common, of course, that comes to mind is YouTube, a service that started in 2005, the same year. A French service also started, Daily Motion, both are still around. YouTube in 2006 was acquired by Google and is really dominating the online video market, in particular in terms of advertising sales. Both YouTube and Dailymotion have, as you know, of course, the model of content generation that is user-generated content. So you upload your own video content to the platform. There is a lot of other services. For example, older than YouTube or Dailymotion is Vimeo. So Vimeo started in 2004 and kind of is a bit more classy. So the codec of Vimeo, the file formats are much better. So the images look crisp, But if you want to use Vimeo in a professional way, as many artists, for example, and publishers do, you have to pay the platform to get the full service. Users don't pay, so you get the content for free, but publishers pay. So this is a different content model here. Vimeo has a different niche as a business model. And the business model also we will consider later on in this lecture series. And then there is live streaming. Live streaming started a few years ago when the broadband connections became strong enough to foster actual live video that requires much more, of course, computation power also on the device to compress and decompress the video content. And it was not, I would say, like before, like 10, 12 years ago, that was technically actually possible. And then a lot of services started, like Periscope, or others failed, like Meerkat. Many platforms like Twitter or Facebook would come up with their own live streaming services. And then there is new platforms emerging like Snapchat or TikTok that particularly profit from people's phones' capabilities of creating short bursts of video stories. And Twitch, as we see here in this graphic, is really shooting up in terms of user adoption. The interesting thing is Twitch has been around for quite a while. It was founded in 2007. And recently, Twitch's basic content proposition, which is gaming, let's play, so looking how people play games, has become so strong that Twitch has made its way up as one of the dominant video content platforms. So it is not the case that television gets one-on-one just substituted. It is really that the pattern of what people want to watch and also what content gets produced thoroughly changes. That is even more dramatic for the newspaper industry. So these charts, I mean, there's Pew Research. There's many other um, data that you find. It's abundant that show you the same. So the news media, the newspaper that were printed daily worldwide had their peak in the 1970s. So in the 1970s, most people in the Western world had become, I would say, wealthy enough and labor protection laws have become strong enough so that they could first afford a newspaper, and second, that they would have the time to read it in the morning. That, of course, can't be taken for granted. I mean, if you are in a kind of exploitative form of servitude, if you are really working I don't know, 12, 15 hours a day to keep alive, you would probably not want to read a newspaper. The adoption of the newspaper, this mass adoption in the Western world after Second World War, is a clear sign how much labor conditions had improved and also how much education had improved. Worldwide, that is a bit the same. It just comes with a time lag. So, for example, in India, the newspaper adoption follows exactly the same curve. Alphabetization was very successful, and also the condition of the masses in India had greatly improved, so that the Indian newspaper market quickly rose during the same time and peaked, I think, in the 1980s. And then something interesting happens. Long before the internet, this peak is left and circulation drops. And the question is, why? Why did that happen? So first of all, a new medium became the lead medium for the masses, and that was television. So television is broadcasted at first mostly by state-owned broadcasting services like in the UK, the BBC, or in Germany or in Italy by state-run or publicly owned broadcasters. Most countries in Europe and also the rest of the world have that model. Not the US, however. In the US, it was three main privately owned broadcasting networks that would reach about 95% of all households. So television became, for many people, more convenient as a news medium. So the subscription numbers for news media printed dropped. But there's a second thing that happened at the same time, and that is that the printing technology really improved. In particular, mass production for high circulation color glossy magazines. So that was the revolution of the offset printing press that really took off in the 1970s also. And by the end of the 70s, we see thousands of special interest magazines. That is all kinds of magazines that focus on, you could say maybe your hobbies like sailing or hunting or sports or whatever, but could be also food, could be any kind of leisure activities, but also like science. For example, the publication Scientific American, which addresses a highly educated audience in scientific topics, but I mean, in a very broad sense. So if you open the Scientific American magazine, it covers basically every science. And of course, no one knows all the sciences, so it covers it in a way that everyone with a higher education could understand. And magazines like that were very successful. And that led, in a way, to a decline in newspapers long before the internet. The really dramatic thing, however, happened then in the 1990s. In the 1990s, classified advertising was the first to shift. You don't see that in the numbers immediately because at first, I mean, like 95 to 2000, internet adoption internationally, particularly, but also in the US, was still rather small. So to reach an audience, you still had to buy advertising in newspapers if you want to reach a local advertising crowd, like, for example, advertising in retail, where you want to have a call to action, like, for example, here is a special offer in our store. Come and buy. So this used to be the most effective way of advertising for promotions for retail. The so-called pork and belly ads were the main source of income for all news media. And it is much easier to address these things locally because your store is brick and mortar. People have to go there on their feet, literally, or drive there, I mean, and then get out of the car and buy the groceries. The promotions of retail chains, even if it is international, big supermarket chains like Carrefour or Walmart or whatever, is usually done locally. And locally, broadcast media don't work that well. So newspaper made a lot of sense for these pork and belly retail ads, as did news media made sense for classified ads. Small insertions, usually 1 or 2 lines only, where you would say, I have, for example, I have furniture from my grandmother who has passed away, who wants to have it. Exactly these ads who were then taken away by services like Craigslist or eBay. And that's what happened in the years 2000 and following. So advertising revenues on top of the circulation dropped sharply for printed media. And that, of course, leads to a dramatic reduction in what news media are able to spend. So here you see the dramatic drop in employed journalists in newsrooms in the printed publications, and that all other industry who comes up, I mean, all the other news media that we think of now in online, for example, would by far not compensate for these losses. So if you calculate a bit with this chart, you see immediately that the New York Times, for example, probably employs something like 10 to 15% of all journalists in the United States. That's an incredible concentration of journalistic power. Yeah, so news have really turned into dead media. I mean, this is really endearing. I mean, this is kind of this socialist utopian design that used to be visible all over Yugoslavia when I was young. It's a great design by the Slovenian industrial designer Sasha Mechtig. So Sasha Mechtig's design for this K67 kiosk became internationally kind of the symbol for kind of this utopian idea, how important news media is, that is forward thinking, that it is kind of the glue of a modern society, of an utopian socialist society like Yugoslavia. Yeah, and it's really dead media. I mean, you can still see it, for example, here in the Museum of Modern Art, the MoMA in New York, but it is only a museum's piece. If you look on the GitHub with the information on this course, you find um, in respective weeks usually the material. So you see here is our studio class. We will look into WordPress and set that up in a minute. But here I want to point out the readings. So what I've put together here in terms of readings is on the one hand all these predictions. So what technology trends will we have to expect in the next year or years, which is always fun to read, I think, and it's important to see what people find important. Then I want to point you towards the story here about the story of medium.com. In a second, I will talk about that. And in particular, of course, on Philip Seib's story on the struggle of the Arab world, in particular, of the Gulf region, with Al Jazeera. So, Al Jazeera in the West, in the Gulf War, in particular in the years of George Bush after 9/11, when the US invaded Iraq and occupied parts of the Arab region, um, for many people in Europe and the US, was kind of the only way of getting information that was not totally embedded into the US government's propaganda. If you in 2002 or 2003 would open the New York Times, for example, you would only read warmongering propaganda, how great the war in Iraq would go and how just this war would be. This is called embedded journalism, and basically all of America's news outlets at that time were totally complicit in being embedded. There was absolutely zero criticality. In Europe, it was not so dire, but still, I mean, it was very hard to get another view on the region if you wouldn't read Arabic. And so Al Jazeera came very handy. Al Jazeera was a very shiny startup company in Doha, Qatar, and people didn't really care that it was 100% owned by the ruler of Qatar. I mean, why would a ruler own Medium? I mean, of course, there is a purpose to that, but people were not thinking of that. That is a problem, I think, of Western kind of post-colonial thinking. As long as it comes from somewhere in the region, it must be true because it's the colonized people who speak themselves. And what you find in the description here is, of course, that the Qatari government had its own agenda, in particular, a few years later, when the so-called Arab Spring started, an uprising that, for example, overthrew the government in Egypt. We will look into that into much more detail in a later part of this lecture series. So the long-term ruler of Egypt, Mubarak, was ousted and arrested, and free elections were held. And in the West, no one realized that Al Jazeera completely turned these elections, obviously or allegedly, in favor of the candidate of the Muslim Brotherhood, Morsi, who became then the first democratically elected leader of Egypt. What an irony, isn't it? I mean, that this democratic and enlightened revolution would lead to the right opposite. And the governments in the Gulf region, of course, were very sensitive to this. They saw what was happening there. And that is, I think, one of the points of the, I would say, of the tensions between the Gulf states with their neighbor, Qatar. When you look at traditional Western news media, in a way, is not that much better. I mean, if you see here this British publication and its horrible racist and nationalist scum that they obviously address here. It comes to mind what a compatriot of mine, Paul Sethe, a journalist of the post-Second World War Germany, once said, the freedom of the press is only the freedom of 200 rich people. It's the freedom of these 200 rich people to publish their opinion. So free is only who is rich, and journalists are usually not rich, and hence journalists are never free. So this is his very dire analysis of post-war European press, and this kind of the Murdoch press in the UK and the big news outlets in the US, and Al Jazeera story also tells you that there is some truth to that. There is publication platforms now. So things like medium.com, which was founded in 2012, are very inviting to try out to publish your own thoughts. And it's very easy, just sign up and start writing. And the platform takes care to keep things safe from hackers and to, in a way, protect you also from lawsuits of intellectual property infringements or whatever. Another platform that was just recently started, Substack. Substack in particular addresses the new trend of newsletters, of email newsletters. So Substack is a very handy platform where you can publish your content and have a newsletter to subscribers, and these subscribers can even be paywalled, so you can even charge for your content on the platform. The platform, of course, gets a share, but it's still much easier, of course, to use a platform like that than to build that your own, I think. However, of course, all these platforms have one disadvantage. If the platform goes broke, all your content is gone. That has happened so many times that I can't even think how much online content I've published and lost over the last 25 years. And the second thing is you never own your words. They own it. Even if they grant you the right to edit and decide to unpublish things, so they will keep your content in their record. And by their terms and conditions, all these platforms get the full right to use your content for whatever they want. So there is a lot to be said to publish yourself, and this is what we want to do. We will use what you should have learned by now. I mean, this class has a lot of prerequisites, so everyone here should know how to use markup languages like HTML, the hypertext markup language. Just to remind you, markup languages have been around for about 500 years. In the early time of printing, it became clear that when you have one person writing a manuscript and handing the manuscript over to the printer, there needs to be some kind of language between the two that tells, well, this part of the text is a headline, or here goes an image. And for that, the printers early on defined a markup language. And in the 1970s, the computer science pioneer Donald E. Knuth came up with a totally beautiful markup language to typeset text. He called this markup language and text editor Tech, and this text typesetting machine Tech, which is most widely used in the form of LaTeX, and I think it's really the #1 publishing tool for scientific papers. I think many of you use that for your own papers. So LaTeX made the concept of markup languages very widespread. So in the late 80s and early 90s, people used markup languages in combination to another concept, which is the hyperlink, to come up with what we see now as the World Wide Web, particularly the engineer at the CERN nuclear facility in Geneva, Tim Berners-Lee, with his invention of HTML as the markup language and the underlying protocol HTTP. Not so commonly seen, but actually super powerful markup languages in publishing are the feed languages, RSS, the resource description framework, site summary language, and Atom. And just briefly having a look of that, I mean, let's take this website, one of my most favorite websites. You should always look at that, is Bruce Schneier's blog on security. And you see the RSS icon here, and let's click on that. And here we are. Have downloaded the RSS feed of Schneier's page, and you see it's structured as an XML document with fields defining, well, this is the title of the page, this is the subtitle, this is other meta information, and here, for example, is the content. So RSS, keep that in mind, is very good. Try it out. Use RSS feeders to syndicate your own kind of news feeds. Now we want finally to go and build our own website that runs on WordPress. And I will lead you step by step through the process. WordPress has been around since 2003 when it was originally published by Matt Mullerweg and Mike Little, two computer scientists who used to work in online publishing and were very dissatisfied by the inaccessibility of the online publishing tools. And so they came up with an open source and free solution that runs on the script language PHP, which we will introduce in the next studio lesson, and a MySQL database server. About 2/3 of the world's web pages run on WordPress. So it is indeed the most widely used publishing tool in the world. I mean, 2/3 of the world's online publications are on WordPress. And so that's a nice thing that so many people use it, that you can always expect that if there is a bug in the code, someone will immediately patch it. And so if you keep your patches up to date, it is very likely that your website stays safe. So to start with WordPress, I've set up an instruction which you find in this link. And since you need web space with certain permissions, and that is very hard to get at NYU, and so I just use my own web server and grant you permission for that. So if you click on this Google Doc, you get a list with 16 URLs, 17 actually, because one is for me, I've set up FTP host. FTP is the file transfer protocol. So that's another web protocol, another internet protocol, like HTTP, that is specialized for sending data back and forth. And this is what we need to install something. On my web server, there is a environment for PHP, which is a script language, for JavaScript, and for SQL. So there's a MicroSQL database installed, as we shall see. So if we type in this URL, I mean, of course, nothing happens because nothing is on that web server yet, and this is what we are going to change now. As I described to you here, the first thing that we do is get the current distribution of WordPress. So follow the link, and here it is, WordPress, blah, blah, blah. It is WordPress.org. On WordPress.com, you find the commercial application that is a blogging platform that you can use for free, but it has also premium services on it. So if you want WordPress to host your blog, you go on WordPress.com. But WordPress.org is the open source free software project. So, and then we download it. I mean, we can download it in different formats. So let's download it. It takes a while because it is quite big. And if we have a look now in the downloads, we see the zip file. Unfortunately, we can't just upload it because we have to make some changes, and also I can't unfortunately grant you the power to execute files on the web server. So let's unzip. And here we have all the files of the WordPress installation. Yeah, and now we have to upload our WordPress installation, the files, to our web space. To upload, we use a protocol called FTP. So FTP stands for File Transfer Protocol. It is the second most common internet protocol after HTTP. So HTTP tells your browser how to copy files from the server locally into the browser cache and then interpret it as HTML code. FTP tells an FTP client how to push files onto a server or pull files from a server. So it is simpler than HTTP, but it is, of course, very important if you want to transfer files. So what I use is the FTP client FileZilla, but of course you may use whatever you like. You can just use the browser, for example. Many browsers of operation systems have this capability. So if you open your FTP client, you see your local files here. And so this is our downloads, and you see our WordPress folder is already decompressed here. And here you see the WP config PHP that we just created and populated with the parameters. And now we have to upload all that to our server. For that, we have to connect to the server first. So let's go back to the sheet. So this is the server name, the host URL. Of course, you take your own one, not mine. So they are just differentiated by this number here. So mine is 0. And please look up what yours is in the file here. This is the username or login. This is the password. And now we connect. We accept the certificate. And here you see our remote files. Actually, my folder is not empty because I tampered around with things already. So you have a file folder WordPress here that's partly populated. We don't bother with that. We just take now all our local files here, literally everything, all the things, and upload that to our root directory by hitting upload. And now you see it starts and loads and loads and loads, and that will take quite a while because you see it is about 2,200 files, and each file takes a few seconds. So let's just wait until that's done. While the download runs, let's have a first look into the database. So our database is located here. We can just click on that link and have a look. And it requires, of course, login and password, which we have in the sheet. Login and password. And here you see in the database, no tables found. Yeah, no surprise, the database is empty. Of course, we have to put our tables in, and that will be the main step of the installation process. So first we are invited to choose our installation language, choose English. And then we have to give WordPress some configuration information that is in particular the database in which later all our content and all our options and parameters will be stored. I'll show you how the tables will look like. We have seen that we have a database at hand already, so let's go. And this is where we have to give the information. So the database name I put here, the same name for all of you. It's this D034E801. So we copy that. Database name, username is the same. This is just how my web server is set up. And the password is this. Localhost we don't change. And now comes a really important point. This is basically the only point where you can make a mistake. The table prefix is by default set to WP underscore. This is a prefix that will be in front of the tables in the database. And since we will all use the same database for economic reasons, because it's expensive to host databases, you have to put each a different prefix in here. And I would suggest that you look here and just take the prefix, the number that I've assigned you. For me, that's 0 underscore. I would just put that in here, 0 underscore. And now we can submit and run the installation. And it seems everything has run well. We have to give the site a title. So that is, for example, my NYU AD blog, my username. This is not the username by which you post later. It should be a username that you only use for the administration, and choose then a second username for posting. So this would be, for example, JB admin. The password, that's a bit cumbersome. You have to save here. It doesn't tell you otherwise. So just copy it and put it somewhere in a text editor or so, and then put in your email address, for example, my email address at NYU. You will need a different email address for each user that you set up. And now everything should run. And we can log in with my email address. And the password. So, and then we can log in. And everything is set up here. So now we have WordPress running. This is the dashboard where you can post everything. So for example, if you go on posts, you see that there is one post already, the Hello World post. Maybe we don't want that, we send it to the trash, but we write a new post and say just our own hello world here. So the editor used to be a bit more kind of old school in the old days. Now it has kind of all these fancy schmancy features that always tells you that, oh, here's another feature added. That is a bit annoying, but I mean, that's how software is these days. So, so of course, it doesn't need to be a blog. It can be any kind of website. So let's maybe to upload an image. And, don't know. I think I have on the desktop. I have screenshots that I made earlier. Like for example, this screenshot here. It's uploaded automatically. And then we can publish, and it asks you if you're really sure to publish, and I mean, why not? So now we have our first post, and we can view that. Let's go to our website, and here is the first post. Is the image. So you see that how the theme is set up. The image doesn't show here yet. It only shows when we open the post. So these are all the features that we have to set first. So this is the post feature. WordPress has two different categories of posts. One is these posts that are chronologically lined up and have categories and so on, and others are meant for more permanent features, are called pages. This could be an about page or the page about the authors who blog and so on. And the pages are usually not chronologically sorted, but added to the menu. And then, speaking of which, we have so-called themes. So WordPress works with themes. That means skins or designs. So this is, for example, the 2021 that I just saw for the first time myself. And here is the themes of previous years. It is, at least in the beginning, when you are not yet so sure how to use PHP and WordPress, always advisable to use these themes instead of programming everything from scratch yourself, because the themes are very robust. It's very unlikely that someone hacks them. In particular, if you use like last year's theme, let's just activate that. So that's now active. And if we refresh the page, so you see that the design has changed. Here is what I just mentioned, that the menu has a sample page. So if we go back to the customization here, we have the menus, and our menu by default shows the pages, but we can change that here, for example. Name and maybe we want to have the post instead. Here. And now you see that we have, instead of the sample page, the first post to click on, and so on. So you can design your menu. The menu can be nested, so you can build sub-menus and position the menus wherever it's appropriate on your theme. So there are certainly more things to be customized in the theme. Like you can tell, for example, how your blog is called, the subtitle. You can change the colors. I mean, all the things that you can imagine, define images and so on. What is, however, really important is the homepage setting, where you can choose if it is just the reverse chronological order of your posts or a static page, where we can, for example, now use our sample page, which was just already in the content management system. It's nothing that we created, but you can create any kind of page here. Yeah, don't need that. So, and then finally, there is the theme editor. So it warns you, and that is absolutely um, reasonable and sensible, that you can destroy everything here. So this is where the actual files are, and you can edit them, like, for example, the CSS sheet, or, for example, the header and footer and the main index template. We will look into that in the next studio session and create a theme of our own. Yeah, speaking of that, if we look into the folder, sorry, the themes are in the folder w-content. If you look here, we have the folder themes. This is where the theme is. If we want to have additional themes, we upload it into that folder. Our images are in the folder uploads, and usually, I mean, by default, are stored by date. So we have the image that we just uploaded here. And by default, WordPress creates all kinds of thumbnails for different so thumbnails and different resolutions in case you want to use responsive web design. That's very practical. I mean, the themes of our time are all responsive. Let's have a quick first look into the configuration files. So the things that actually make WordPress run, these PHP files. So in the package that you unpacked after downloading the zipped WordPress file is a file wp-config sample.php. You see here this file is in the files that you uploaded. Now there exists a second file, wp-config.php, without the sample, that has been created a bit later. So if we look at the file in an editor of your choice, for example, Atom, let's open the file. So you see all the parameters that you can configure. So there is the database name, and it has a placeholder here. Same with username, password, and so on. So it's not populated. And if we look at the second file, the wp-config.php without sample, you see that now WordPress automatically had put in, while we ran through the installation process, the values that we gave it. Here's the password and so on. And now comes the really important thing, the table prefix. This is where WordPress initially has WP underscore. And we have put in, for my installation, 0 underscore. And this is where you put all your different values so that you don't overwrite each other's installations. So let's think what I am missing. But I think that's it, basically. Let's just have also a look into the database. So the database now has tables, of course, and so the posts are stored here in the table posts, no surprise, and you see that there are versions, so you can go back in versions and change everything here. But of course, it's better to do that um, in the dashboard. And then you have the options where basically all the settings of your blog are. For example, the URL and your root directory. This is an important setting if you have subdirectories of your root directory on which you want to point the blog. This changes the HTTP access file in your server. So, and maybe the last thing, where is our user? So here is our admin user, but now let's create a user for our everyday use. Needs to have a unique email address, can't be the same as the one you use already. But we have alias email address is for NYU, so let's use this one. And this is optional website. That we don't need to add that. And again, it's advisable that you store your password, otherwise you will have to log in via email all the time. And if you want to grant yourself administrator rights, that is set here. Usually it is sufficient that you set yourself as an editor. Then you can post and change posts and upload images, but you can't change the theme or you can't change all the nitty-gritty things in the system. So, and yeah, now we have set up our blog, and I hope that you play around now, and we will discuss what you did in our next session. Yeah. Next time we will go further in what we are talking about in politics of code and look in the public sphere, the public and private spaces, which is closely connected to publishing. And in the studio part, we will concentrate a bit further on PHP and look how WordPress in the deep actually works.